What got you there? What got you? What got you there with Sean DeLaney?
I'm Sean DeLaney, and on this episode of What Got You There, I sit down with Masterworks founder and CEO Scott Lynn. Masterworks is revolutionizing how artwork is invested. And so originally you had to be worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to invest in good art. And Scott's changed that with what they're doing at Masterworks, where every investor has the opportunity to buy pieces of legendary paintings such as Banksy's and Basquiat's. So if you want to know what it takes to survive in a fast-growing startup and some of the decision-making frameworks used by the best entrepreneurs, then you're going to love this conversation with Scott Lynn. Scott, welcome back to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well.
Fantastic. I'm always curious. So it's 5 p.m. on a Wednesday. Like, how are you feeling at the end of a day like this? Just running a fast-growing company.
Yeah, I was actually feeling exhausted, but yeah. I didn't want you to call attention to that.
I know I'm always intrigued, right? Like there's so many decisions you have to make throughout the day. We're going to cover some of the decision-making frameworks. And I know we covered a lot of your backstory. You were originally on episode 137. So I'm like really interested in the evolution, both of you and the Masterworks. But I would love to know, is there a mindset you have that if you could just pass on to pretty much like any young person starting out, you think would be incredibly beneficial for them?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I've learned throughout the years, like when I think about the past 20 years of starting different companies and learning along the way, I think the thing that's been most impactful to me is really deciding what to do. And I think so many of us, I was actually talking to someone about this the other day. I think particularly when people go from job to job, they do it in a very suboptimal way, because most people, when they start looking for a job, they look for a job for 30 days or 60 days. And they wind up in the next thing that's available that fits their needs, right? But that's a really suboptimal way of thinking about how to take your next step. And I think starting companies is similar, right? Like you want to be really thoughtful around what market do you go into, how does your pricing strategy work, how do you stay differentiated? So I think the thing that I've learned throughout the years is really figuring out where to spend time rather than just executing really rapidly or working really hard every single day.
That's really interesting. How did that actually play out when deciding to actually launch Masterworks?
Well, Masterworks is sort of this really lucky evolution of doing something I love, which is collecting art for the past 20 years and kind of combining that with finance and technology. But Masterworks was this. I think the idea really started sort of at the very early phase of the crypto industry, right? And a lot of people were talking about, how do you tokenize assets? How do you make things more accessible? How do you democratize things? And it's funny because I've sort of lived with this great art collection personally for many years, but never really thought about how to build investment products around it. So, that light bulb kind of turned on 4 years ago. And it just occurred to me that this is probably the largest asset class that's never been securitized. There's never been an investment product built for it. When you look at the performance of the asset class, it's historically appreciated faster than things like public equities. But the only way to allocate to it is if you have millions of dollars to buy a painting. So it's generally inaccessible. So I think when I started thinking through it, it's just all of those dynamics felt really good. We did some early testing to figure out, is there product market fit? Do people actually want to invest in a product like this? We saw really good signals, and then we started scaling it.
You mentioned those early days, just testing some things out. Like, what else is happening there? I think so many people are just intrigued. It's like, okay, here's an idea. It's kind of experimenting a bit, but then I'm going to take that leap, like you mentioned. Like you're about to enter a multi-decade journey here in terms of the company. So I'm just wondering, what are the other little things going on then?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any business, particularly as an entrepreneur, it's easy to convince yourself that your idea is great, right? And I see this so many times across lots of different people. I hear them pitch me ideas, and I'm just thinking to myself, I don't understand how this makes sense at all. But sometimes we just become, and I've done this myself many times, like so passionate about something, so entrenched in something, you don't know when to give up. So I like to be really methodical around how I think about starting a business. And that's coming up with the idea, really understanding things like the total available market, how big is the market, are there any competitors in the market, but then also starting to test very simple product ideas. So one of the things that me and other people on our teams have done before is when we come up with a business idea, we literally build a fake website for the business. We run advertising on Facebook and other platforms to see how much receptivity or kind of what the relevancy scores or just the engagement scores are with that product concept. And that in itself has killed so many different business ideas I've had, because you come up with a great idea and then you put it in market, and you think everyone's going to love it, and all of a sudden you're paying $400 a lead, and the ads are getting no response, and it just doesn't work, so you quickly shut it down. But I think iterating in those really early stages to test different business ideas is critical, and I think as an entrepreneur you learn a lot from that.
No, this is great. You're even bringing up confirmation bias, right? Like, this is my idea. I'm looking for every single thing to confirm this. I'm wondering today, like, how are you battling it against that amongst yourself, right? Like being CEO.
You always, I mean, it's funny. Like, I think introspection is really hard. I think people in general are not good at, being introspective, and maybe that's confirmation bias for whatever reason. But I think you always kind of have to second guess yourself. Like Andy Grove, like always be paranoid, right? Like there's some dynamic like that I think is really healthy. And a lot of these businesses and markets are changing so fast too, right? Like the people that you have on your team today may not work tomorrow. The strategy that you have today may not work tomorrow. So you're always trying to avoid confirmation bias, although I think avoiding it entirely is hard. But I think we're always trying to do that.
You mentioned how rapidly things change. I'm wondering for you, how do you get to that 30,000 foot view where like you can zoom in on the micro details, but then you can also zoom out on like, okay, what are we doing 5-10 years from now?
So this zooming in and out thing, I think, is a really, really interesting point. I was actually talking to one of my friends, is not to be named, but one of the top tech founders of all time, and we were talking about how do you think about hiring really successful managers, in particular really successful CEOs, to run big companies, and what skill sets matter. And one of the things that I think really clicked between both of us was that it's very difficult to find people who are very high level. And by high level, I mean strategic, right? Understand how to think about product, how to think about differentiation, what markets to go into, when to partner with someone, when to buy someone, like high level strategic thinking that at the same time can get very low level. Because a lot of these businesses, particularly businesses that are SaaS or predicated on very specific LTV to CAC metrics, if you change an onboarding funnel, your CAC goes up 40%. And those very small details can have really make or break it dynamics within businesses that I still think in today's world, most CEOs don't appreciate. I don't think Harvard Business School is teaching, minute details around onboarding funnels, which can make or break businesses. And there's lots of CEOs that will just say, oh, I'll just hire a marketing person to do that. But those details are so critical that I don't think you can just hire them, right? So I think that the thing that's hard to find is a CEO that moves between really, really high level and really low level, and just frankly ignores the middle. Like in the middle, you kind of have a middle management layer, which is essential for any company. But it's easy to hire people into those roles. It's really hard to hire the high level people and the super low level people. So I don't know, that's a little bit of a tangent, but that's kind of how I think.
No, this is really interesting. Yeah. So I'm glad we went there. How would you describe yourself as a CEO, right? Even if I was asking another employee at Masterworks, like what type of CEO is Scott?
So I'd love to hear the answer to that question. I mean,
right.
So I think it depends on who you ask, right? So I think certain people would say I'm very high level and totally hands off, to the point that I just made. And I think other people would say I'm super low level, micromanage every detail. And the reality is, and I don't know if people at Masterworks are going to listen to this or not, but it's really person dependent, right? If I'm very low level and very hands on, that probably means that I either think there's big opportunity in that function, or I think there's problems with that function. And if I'm totally hands off, that probably means that I'm happy with how that function's running. So I think managers have to be situational, and really adapt to the business.
What does it feel like when you're operating at your best?
I think it feels like you're having fun, right? I don't believe in this concept of work-life balance. I've never believed in this concept of work-life balance. Like at the end of the day, if you're really successful, it's probably because you really love what you're doing and it doesn't feel like work. So trying to put people in this framework where they think of like work-life balance, I think if you're thinking about work-life balance, you just have the wrong job, right? You're just like, you're just doing something that you don't fundamentally love.
Yeah, back to your earlier point, right? Like what is this thing you're about to embark on? I always think about like what ship are you going to get on if you're going to be taking this job, this career. If you're going to be on the ship
Yeah.
for a while, you better be one of those people who are really going to enjoy it.
Yeah, and don't get on the wrong ship, right? And there's
Yeah.
just so many people that get on the wrong ship, particularly in early careers, right? You think so I was telling a friend's kid this at one point, but it's sort of like a decision tree, right? Like you sort of come down, you have two options. From each of those two options, you have two more options, and like making your very early decisions correct are so critical because that's you're starting off the decision tree, and if you wind up on the wrong branch, then you wind up in some place that you don't want to be 20 or 30 years from now. So I think making the right decisions really early in someone's career is really, really important.
How do you think about like your ability to impact major aspects of the company with each individual decision? I'm just trying to think, right? Like each of the decisions you're going to make, they're going to be weighted differently. And like those really high impact decisions, what does that process look like for you to finally pull the trigger and make that decision?
Well, it's really, critical decision making. I just think it has to be really thorough, right? It has to be really thorough. You have to second guess yourself, to think through all the different situations. Um, try to think through how it plays out. Like for me personally, when I do that, it's usually alone, right? I'm thinking about those things alone at night or in the morning. Um, I don't know if there's a perfect process for it, but I just think spending a lot of time thinking it through um, is really important. I mean, there's a lot of people that just do really simple analyses. I would do a SWOT analysis or something, and I just don't think any of that stuff has ever really been shown to be predictive or particularly useful. Like I do think having a framework in your own brain to think through kind of cause and effect of things is important, but I think it's just spending the right amount of time on really, really critical decisions.
Well, one of the things that seems to keep popping up, you mentioned introspection earlier, and it seems like you're pretty self-aware. Like you understand what works best for you, and you're not trying to just apply someone else's model on top of you just because you heard that was a good model. And so I'm just like wondering about that process for you, just becoming more introspective, really understanding how you operate best. Is that something that you actively think about, or is this just naturally occurred?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's funny though. Like I don't know if I'm not self-aware, but I know I'm self. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sure how to think about that, but yeah, I look. I think the best CEOs are those that are humble. I think it's those that listen well, those that learn, those that grow over time. So I just think I think it's all of those qualities that make people successful, and just a natural willingness to want to iterate, to want to try more, to continue to just move ahead.
You mentioned just kind of like some of those big things that are typical of successful CEOs. Like what's happening behind the scenes that's really hard as a CEO of a fast growing company that just most people don't talk about or just it's really not known?
Yeah, there's so many things, I guess. It's like there's different phases that companies go through, and I think this 0 to 1 phrase that Peter Thiel came up with is a nice way to think of the early phase. But going through those phases is hard, right? Masterworks went through the phase of kind of finding product market fit, scaling quickly, arguably kind of I guess achieving profitability. Maybe that was later in the scaling phase, and today we're really in scale phase, right? Like we found product market fit. This last Monday, we had 11 people start. We're hiring 30 or 40 people a month. Um, and to a certain extent, like we're trying to keep the wheels on the bus, right? Like we're growing quickly from a people perspective. We have tons of new people starting. We're training new people, and we're trying to make sure they understand our business, our revenue model, the strategy, where they fit into the strategy. But at the same time, also just trying to make sure that they're the right people and that we're making the right bets as we scale up the company. So, I think in these hyper growth phases, it's just it's just a lot of work. So it's people decisions primarily that I would say I'm spending time on now.
Oh, then I'm really intrigued. Like, what are you spending the most amount of time on that just doesn't actively show up on the bottom line, but just has huge impact for the future of the company?
I mean, right now it's people, right? So I'm literally spending 6 hours a day in interviews right now. So we're
And
just
then you
trying
get
to
to spend an
hire.
hour talking with me afterwards.
Yeah, so I mean, not interviews like this, but yeah, people interviews. So right now, that's really the majority of time, and that doesn't have an impact on the bottom line. But those are such critical decisions, right? Like if you look at all data around mishires, and I've just experienced it personally so many times, right? You mishire someone at the senior level, and it can just be a make or break dynamic, particularly when you're in this hyper growth phase.
I think it'd be helpful even just to add some context. I just don't want to make sure anyone who didn't listen to episode 1, just what exactly Masterworks does and just kind of like walk us through the process currently.
Yeah, so Masterworks is the first firm ever to securitize a painting. We do that by filing individual artworks with the SEC as public offerings. Today, we're taking one painting public roughly every 5 days. We're raising right now on a run rate basis about $500 million a year, growing 2-3x year over year. So I guess since we spoke last time, like we've become the largest buyer in the art market. We're the only firm to provide any sort of investment product to help investors gain exposure to the asset class. We have a secondary market now where people are trading securities and individual paintings. So we've really built out a platform for the first time ever for people to invest in art.
So essentially, people can buy fractional shares of some of those legendary art pieces around, correct?
Yeah, and the thesis is that if you look at the characteristics of the asset class over the past 25 years, contemporary art is appreciated at 14% a year. It's non-correlated, meaning it doesn't necessarily move in the same direction that the public equities do. So it doesn't go up when the stock market does and decline. It just really behaves differently, which makes it a very good diversifier for any portfolio. The challenge historically is the only way to invest in it is if you have millions of dollars to buy a painting. So we think it's a natural asset class to securitize. It's a natural asset class that people should be able to invest in. Like we fundamentally believe that 10 years from now, people will think of investing in art or allocating to art similar to how they think about allocating to public equities, allocating to real estate, allocating to fixed income. We think it deserves a role in an investment portfolio.
Yeah, you mentioned Masterworks has achieved product market fit. I'm wondering for you as the team, like when when was that moment? Like when did it click? Like, oh yeah, we've got this.
I don't know if there was a single
You
moment.
guys didn't celebrate in the office? No.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a single moment, right? Like we definitely, when we started the business, we knew there was, because of all these tests that we had run, as I mentioned, we knew there was a lot of interest in people investing in art broadly, right? But in order to get the onboarding funnel right, in order to get the investment products right, how we price things, even just what type of art we buy, right? Like we didn't know until we founded the firm that contemporary art was appreciating at 14% a year and old masters are appreciating at 2% a year, right? We had an idea around that, but it took us a couple of years to really build out a research team to help inform us on how we think about appreciation in the market. So, a lot of this business and making it click was just slowly iterating on every different component until we have a flywheel, which today is spinning pretty quickly.
What is that research process like? How are you sourcing these pieces?
Yeah, so it's crazy. So the art market, I tell people this all the time. I don't think people totally believe me, but to contextualize it, the most sophisticated people in the art market today are families. So they're families that have been collecting for multi-generations. They have multi-billion-dollar collections, but there's nobody. There's not like a professional manager such as Masterworks operating the art market, right? There's nobody with a data analytics team. People aren't using data to make decisions. Sotheby's and Christie's, the two leading auction houses, are more than 250 years old. Like these businesses literally have been operating the same way for centuries. So when we thought about using data to figure out how different things in the art market were appreciating, what we quickly learned is that there wasn't a data set. So we went out and we bought auction catalogs of public auction sales going back to the 1960s, 1970s, and had a team of 30 interns literally do data entry, recording this data into a database, which now if you go to the Masterworks website and click on price database, you can actually access this data for free. And that data really served as the basis to do index construction on the asset class, understand how different segments are appreciating. But it just, to me, it was so amazing coming into this market because, I don't think there's any other industry that hasn't been digitized in 2020, right? Or, whenever we did that, I guess 2018 or whatever the year was. But we were kind of the first ones to really create a data set that could be used to understand performance.
I know you're probably like, this is a somewhat obvious question, but like, why you? Like, why did you see the white space and then like able to capitalize on that?
I get asked that all the time, and I really, I don't honestly know. The things that are hard about the business is that it's a heavily regulated business, right? All of our offerings are filed with the SEC. Our sales team is licensed by FINRA. Everything we do is very complicated from a regulatory perspective. So I think that is just a really high hurdle that a lot of entrepreneurs haven't been able to get over when having this idea, and lots of people have had this idea historically. I think another one is how we use data to inform what art we buy, how to think about the characteristics of the asset class. We've really been better than anyone else at that historically. And I think just my background in the art market and connections in the art market, it's a very old school market. It's hard to walk into a lot of these galleries or auction houses and buy $20 million paintings if you don't have a reputation or a brand in that segment. So there's lots of things I can come up with, but it's surprising that nobody else has done it before.
Believe me, I'm not looking for like black and white answers. The majority of this, there shouldn't be black and white answers. I'm just intrigued about like the thought process and some of the things, even like you mentioned, just going into an auction house or just having some of these connections, these little things, they all come together. I'm wondering though, were there things that you or the team were just spending too much time on? Like, let's call it over these past 2.5 years, where like in hindsight, it's like, you know what, we probably would have pulled the cord there a little sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were lots of things that we spent time on in the early stages that did not make sense. So I'll give you an example. So one of the things that we thought when we first started the business was that we wanted to create a fund product for investors to buy securities in a fund that had owned lots of different Masterworks paintings, and we could just distribute that fund through family offices and in institutions. And this was sort of at the same time that we're creating the retail platform where people could like pick and choose individual paintings to invest in, but we didn't exactly know what the right investment product was. So, the easy approach from a very high level 30,000 foot perspective is you build this fund, you sell it to a bunch of wealthy family offices, you raise $100 million, and then you go forward. Like, that's much easier than building a platform that has to do, automated investing, through lots of different vehicles where people are picking and choosing paintings and trading securities, et cetera. But I think what we didn't appreciate with that is that we didn't really have a differentiator in that space, right? Like, we were a first-time manager. Nobody knew us. The asset class was brand new. We couldn't articulate exactly even how fast the asset class was appreciating, how to think about it versus other asset classes. And we really just got no traction, right? So we spent 6 or 12 months trying to do that with the team and really got nowhere. We're doing that again today now, but I think today we're 4 years later, we have a track record. Most people know us. If you're interested in art investment products, people are coming to us anyway. But that's an example of I guess a strategy that we had early on that we thought made sense high level, that we never got off the ground for various reasons.
Scott, I appreciate this so much. I mean, this is awesome. Like, you're actually describing how it actually works with starting a company as opposed to like, no, like, flawless idea, execution was perfect.
It's never flawless.
No, I know. This is great though. And like, one of the things that just keep popping up is the amount of unknowns and scenarios like that you're entering, where like you just don't have defined outcomes. And so I'm wondering for you, I know you've been an entrepreneur for a very long time. How do you get comfortable with going into the unknown and handling that complexity?
I think you get comfortable with knowing you won't get comfortable. Meaning, if you, in one of my favorite books that I read last year was Thinking Fast and Slow. Or did you read the book? Mm-hmm. Daniel Kahneman, yeah. It was a really great book, and I think one of the things that book highlights is that a lot of success in life is luck, but if you conclude that it's luck, then what you do differently is you try to put yourself in as many situations as possible to be lucky. And I think that's what really successful people do, right? Like, we realize that a lot of things are just luck, but you iterate fast, you try new things, you fail, this term fail fast, you fail fast, and you just keep moving forward. So I think that's really, really critical.
Yeah, you bring up such a good point. Like, so many people are willing just to like stop things even before they start, where a lot of great entrepreneurs is like they explore the possibilities. Like, well, let's see what's the potential here, what can happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think you move into the unknown, see what happens, and then if it doesn't work for whatever reason, you move into the next unknown, right? Like everything is effectively an unknown that you just got to get comfortable with.
Yeah, you mentioned Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I have no idea if you even have the time to read, but are you an avid reader, or are you reading a lot of books or other things like that?
I mean, I go through phases, I think, depending on how tired I am at night. But yeah, one of my New Year's resolutions was to get back to reading kind of 30, 45 minutes a night. I wouldn't say I've been that successful with that this year, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely books that have been really influential to me and have shaped my career that I go back to over the years.
I'm wondering, like, say you could have any entrepreneur, CEO, business leader throughout history, and could just like be in your corner that you could just like go through strategy with decisions. Who would you love just to have there?
So my answer is super geeky. So mine is not like a well-known personality, but it's Michael Porter, who wrote Competitive Strategy, right? So he's really been the most influential person in my career in terms of how do I think through business strategy, how do I think about differentiation, how do I think about product, and I really like what Porter's done, because he's basically given business leaders throughout the decades a very specific framework to think through how do you position your business, how do you differentiate to capture most margin within a particular market. And I think that's just a framework that particularly in today's world, where like everyone wants to be a CEO and everyone's trying a different idea all the time, is kind of missing. But I think it's one of the most important ideas in business history.
I love these inflection moments, right? Like where you pick up this book, you're fundamentally different afterwards. Are there any other like key inflection points? I'm just thinking like weren't you managing like 70 people as a CEO when you were 17? like I still just like crack up for that story. So I'm just like wondering like how you progress from that.
Yeah, I mean, so you're right. So I started from my first company in high school, which became the most popular game on the internet when I was graduating high school, and that business grew very quickly. So I think, inflection points, I don't know if I would call them inflection points. Like I would describe, things as kind of learning phases, I guess. And we talked very early on in the episode, sort of that change from focusing on execution to focusing on strategy or deciding what to do. I spent the first 10, 15 years of my career hyper focused on execution, right? Like people, structure, process, working hard, working fast, without really thinking about where was I going or what was I working on. Now, in the early days of the internet, there was just like so much opportunity everywhere that maybe execution was just as important as anything else. But there's so many struggles as an entrepreneur that you go through. I think everyone kind of has people management struggles, right? Like how do you hire people? How do you coach people? How do you fire people? My thinking on that's definitely evolved throughout the years. How do you think about strategy? How do you think about product? What are your weaknesses? Like, who do you hire on your team that you really need? So there's lots of stuff, but nothing specific really comes to mind,
mentioned
I guess.
Execution to strategy, a lot of that involving people as well. Where's like the next 10-year learning phase? Like, are you even thinking about that at all?
Yeah, you never know, right? Like it's it's much easier to recognize this stuff in hindsight, I think, than it is, than it is when you're in the present. But yeah, for me, like the challenge with Masterworks is I've never really been right. I've been in tech, I've been in art, I've kind of been in finance, but we're getting sort of deep into the weeds of the finance world at this point. So I think a lot of that's been a learning for me, at least in terms of when we think of intermediary distribution and how we interact with advisors, how we sell in institutions. So that's probably been my biggest learning curve, this year.
Yeah, final thing around like learning curve and learning phases. I'm just like wondering for you, like what's going on behind the scenes? Like, are there things you're spending a lot of time on that just most people would never even conceptualize or think about, but you view as like really vital to your success and the company's success?
Well, we're always, I guess when I think about priorities, I always sort of think about like the Stephen Covey model, right? Where you have things that are urgent and important, and you have things that are not urgent and important. And I think, as a CEO, you kind of always have to be spending time on both. Um, with our business right now, it feels like everything is urgent and everything is important. But to really make progress, and hiring, frankly, is one of those things that's always, never urgent but always important. Um, you have to focus on that category. So yeah, I mean, I try to, I guess, divide tasks accordingly and kind of prioritize based on that.
I know originally, like you're so good at spotting the white space. I'm wondering for you, like where's Scott's spidey sense going off with regards to like what's happening in the business world that's just not obvious to others, but to you, like your blinkers are going off.
Yeah, it's so I have this list of ideas that I track, and I come up with like one business idea a day, and I think about it. I think about it over time, and I get rid of 95% of them because I realize 10 days later there was a horrible idea. I just keep cycling through all these things. So, I have lots of different ideas. I think on different industries that are super antiquated. That could still be disrupted, right? Like one of the industries that I always talk about that just makes no sense to me is recruiting. Like I have no idea why companies pay recruiters, the money they pay to bring candidates in. Feels like the job process of finding a job, making sure that it's like a dream job for people. It's a great life decision. It feels like that's broken. I also think it's really interesting how when you look at data high level from a macro perspective, one of the things that drives that's clearly drives happiness and every individual human being is friendships. But the entire market is really focused on dating. I've always found that to be a really, really interesting dynamic. So there's lots of stuff like this that I think still there's lots of white space out there that still exists in different industries that are waiting to be disrupted. It's just finding that that right product or that right way to do it that's always the hard part.
How do you channel that creative energy, right? Like I can tell your mind just is going a million miles a minute. I'm assuming throughout the day. Like, how do you challenge that, or is the answer like you're really not channeling that?
I mean, I'm 41 years old now, so I work out with a 24-year-old trainer who kills me every morning. That's me. I mean, that's the only way that I kind of manage stress. Um, but yeah, I'm not good at it, I guess.
Yeah, we're all figuring this out, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I appreciate what you've been able to do is you're talking about like so many of the different industries that you've tapped into and then went super deep on. And so I'm wondering, are there things that you're studying outside the art world that you think are like really going to greatly influence the art market moving forward?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, there's a couple of dynamics going on in the art market today that I think are unique. One is the Masterworks dynamic, right? Right. We're taking next year we'll buy most likely more than $1 billion in art, and that's entirely new capital that's being dumped into the art market. Where historically these paintings have really traded between ultra high net worth families living around the world. Um, so we're bringing a new capital source into the art market, which I think is incredibly disruptive. And I think a lot of people in the art market, including ourselves, aren't entirely sure how to think about how that impacts things over time. Uh, this other dynamic within the art market, which is interesting, is really we're seeing more of a focus, I think, over the past several decades on living artists, whereas historically much of the returns have been deceased artists. So we're wondering how that impacts kind of the asset class as living artists gain more and more momentum, more and more kind of control of the market. I mean, obviously they're living, they're more risky in certain ways than ones who are deceased. So I think the market's changing in terms of what types of artists are valued. Like the capital coming into the market is changing. And I think a lot of the intermediaries are changing, right? I think Sotheby's and Christie's would say they're focused on selling online more so than in person. That's kind of a COVID theme. We're seeing a lot of crypto people come into the art market for the first time, particularly for artists like Banksy, Picasso. So there's definitely more change in the art market than I think there has been in decades.
What living artist is just seeing the most interest right now?
Well, the most interest, I guess if you define a most interest as the highest appreciation rate, I think the highest appreciating artist that we track over the past year is probably Banksy. Banksy is interesting because our research team identified him as a momentum artist maybe 2 years ago, and we started buying Banksy back then. And that was somewhat of a controversial decision. Like a lot of people that don't know the art market would say that makes total sense. Banksy's a big name, but Banksy, if you think about it, is actually a very hard artist to back because he's anonymous. He doesn't have a gallery. He's not part of the art world infrastructure. You don't see him out at events. He's not active with major collectors. He has a very small body of work. There's not a lot of Banksy paintings. But we're seeing more of these pop culture dynamics now influence artist markets. And I'm not sure the exact numbers, but I mean, his market's gone up 100% probably year over year, if not more at this point. So he's clearly been the standout compared to other artists.
What are you guys looking at in terms of the pop culture impact on these specific artists and pieces?
It's a hard question because there's not that many artists that have really pop culture followings, right?
Yeah.
Banksy has it, Cause has it. So we don't have a big data set to really conclude how the pop culture dynamic or the Instagram dynamic for that matter really impacts these artist markets. Like we do see more new collectors coming in to Banksy's market in particular. I think we probably see that also with Cause, but to a lesser extent. So possibly it's helping bring in new collectors into their market, and drive up prices. And generally what we see within the art industry is that once a collector comes in and starts collecting one specific type of artist, they'll eventually start collecting other types of artists over time. So I think that's a good dynamic for the market.
So are you guys tracking like what are those second order artists they're going to start following and then buy pieces based on that? So like you can be predictive in terms of like what pieces will be more beneficial in the long run?
A little bit. I mean, we always tell people that when you look at volatility in the art market, it's very hard to predictably make money if you're spending less than $500,000 a painting.
Okay.
The probability and outcomes is just too wide. So we're generally focusing on $500,000, $1 million plus paintings because those returns are more predictable. There's definitely people in the art market that would tell you they can predictably buy $50,000 paintings and they know they'll turn into $500,000 paintings. We think data would show otherwise, but yeah.
What's the impact of just like NFTs and everything that's going on? I know you mentioned like the crypto space is having some impact. Like, I'm just wondering like how you're assessing all of this.
Yeah, so I'm the outspoken anti-NFT person.
Yeah.
We don't believe in NFTs for two primary reasons. So the first is that if you just take a step back and just think about Finance 101, the definition of a strategic asset class is anything that beats inflation and is non-correlated. That's what deserves a role in any investment portfolio. And I think with NFTs, there's not even enough data to conclude that they're appreciating, right? There's tons of data to conclude that they're hugely volatile. They go way up, they go way down, they go way up, they go way down. But it's not, I don't think that we can conclude that they're predictably appreciating. In terms of correlation, I think there's a very high correlation between NFTs and Ethereum. There's very high correlation between Ethereum and Bitcoin. And there's very high correlation between Bitcoin and public equities. So we're not really seeing, even if we could conclude that NFTs are appreciating, we're not really seeing them today as a diversifier for an investment portfolio. So that's reason number one. Like they just don't really meet the definition of what we think of as a strategic asset class. The second reason, which I just fundamentally struggle with, and I don't know how anyone gets their head around this. Let me use an example to explain it. So if we go out and we buy a $20 million Basquiat painting, which we do all the time at this point, right? We don't actually own the copyright to that painting. The Artist Foundation owns the copyright. So when you're buying an NFT, you're literally buying an NFT that contains a digital image that you have no copyright or intellectual property rights to. Like you own that image just as much as I own that image. And how people are spending millions of dollars on something that they fundamentally have no ownership in just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I stay away from things I don't know. And that's one of the things I'm like, I just got no idea on this. But like, this is also highlighting one of the things I'm just so intrigued by, like the number of things you have to be understanding, right? Like you even mentioned you guys are taking something public every, 5 to 10 days, which is crazy. Then you have to understand the art world. You got to understand tech. You've got to understand crypto, everything like that. Like, what is your information stream like in terms of just like, what's the information you need daily to be able to make these decisions?
Yeah, it's huge, and it's getting bigger at Masterworks. So it's really interesting. So today we're focused on 55 artist markets. There's roughly 7,000 artists that trade publicly at auction. we're focused on a very small subset. Out of those 55, we've seen more than $10 billion in work that's been offered to us privately. So we're now getting to the point where we have this huge data set of private work that nobody else has, that just helps us understand how prices are trending in private markets, independent of the public auction markets. So that in itself is a huge competitive advantage.
What's just art buying going to look like in 5-10 years? I'm just wondering, like, are there going to be big shifts, or is just going to kind of more people investing into Masterworks?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the challenges with the art market, which we've done a good job reducing, is just transaction fees. There's too many people in the art market trying to take, too big of a piece of the pie. Like, advisors charge 10%, auction houses charge, anywhere between 10 and 20%. Dealers charge 5 or 10%, depending on who's brokering the painting. So all of these transaction costs just really make it prohibitive for collectors that aren't sophisticated to make money in the art market. And I think that's really problematic. So I hope that over time we see transaction costs go down in the market, and we see dealers, galleries just become more thoughtful around how to bring in new collectors, how to help them understand the market, how to help them understand art, not only from a cultural significance perspective, but also from an investment perspective, right? I think there should be an expectation that if a dealer tells a collector they should buy something for $1 million, that dealer has a fiduciary obligation to make a recommendation that's right for that person. So today the market's just a little bit of the Wild West. So I think that hopefully changes over time.
Interesting. No, I appreciate you shedding some light on that. I know it's been a long day. We're going to wrap this up here in a couple of minutes. I am wondering though, like, what's the biggest unknown that you just have question marks on, like that you're like really intrigued by, that just, like, it's like one of those head scratchers. You're like, I'm going to put some more attention to that. It just got me intrigued right now.
That's a good question. I mean, nothing is really coming to mind, right? I wish I had an answer to that, but I think I'm just so focused on kind of Masterworks in this business right now. I'm thinking less and less about other stuff lately.
I'm sure you're probably appreciative of the question at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Sort of the bottom one here, and then we'll link it some more up with in terms of what Masterworks is doing. But if you could just sit down with anyone, dead or alive, you would just love having like a deep form conversation with, who would you love to do that with?
So mine would be very personal, right? So it would be my mom, who passed away when I was in my early 20s. Just because as you get older, I think you realize your parent relationships are probably very different than how you perceive them as a child. So I think there's lots of questions I would ask there. From a business perspective, I mentioned Michael Porter, who's living. I think there's other people as well that are just fascinating. We mentioned Kahneman. I was a huge Jack Welch fan when I was younger, in my early 20s. I don't know. For me, I think really talking with people that have influenced you and how you think about business today, decision making today, life, personal stuff is most interesting.
Final one. Which artist throughout history are you just most in awe of?
Okay, so my personal answer on this is this artist named Gustave Courbet. And for people who are listening who know art will know the artist, but he was the first realist artist, kind of founder of modernism. And the thing that's so incredible is this painter was painting nude women in 19th century France, and at that point in time it was regarded as so crazy, so revolutionary, that he was exiled from the country, right? He was not allowed to come back. And you can go to the Metropolitan and see this painting, Origin of the World, which is this very explicit kind of X-rated painting, which today doesn't really, it's like anything else. Like, you've seen it a million times, but back then it was so significant politically that they exiled him. So I think he's one of the most just revolutionary, crazy, amazing painters in history that I always find fascinating.
That's awesome. We'll have everything you mentioned linked up in the transcript and show notes. I'm just wondering, anything else you want to leave the listeners with, or any way for them to stay connected with you and what you're doing at Masterworks?
Yeah, so to check out Masterworks, www.masterworks.io, request access, create an account, schedule a call with our membership team, who basically will walk you through how to think about art as part of an investment portfolio, how art can impact your portfolio, hopefully for the better. And they'll talk about investment objectives, allocation rates, how to think about minimum investment, and so on. But yeah, www.masterworks.io.
Scott, Lynn, can't thank you enough for joining us on What Got You There.
Thanks for having me.
Got you there with Sean DeLaney.